I died on a Wednesday night in March. And what Jesus showed me on the other side, what he revealed about the hidden thing blocking my soul, I have never heard anyone talk about, not in church, not in a book, not anywhere. I have prayed every single day for 2 years. 2 years of opening my Bible in the morning, sitting in the same pew at church, mouthing the same words I've mouthed since I was a child, and feeling absolutely nothing. Not doubt, not anger, nothing, like speaking into a room where no one lives, like pressing your hand against a wall and waiting for it to press back. That was me, Sarah Mitchell, 38 years old, elementary school teacher, someone who never stopped believing in God, not for a single day, but who, for 2 solid years, could not feel him at all. I want to tell you what he showed me, because what he revealed changed everything I thought I understood about my own heart. And I believe it might be the same thing blocking yours. I need you to stay with me, because what Jesus showed me wasn't a sin I had committed recently. It wasn't anything the church had ever warned me about specifically. It was something I had buried so thoroughly, so carefully, that I genuinely didn't know it was there. Something locked inside me that I had mistaken for healing. I grew up in a Christian household. Faith wasn't a weekend activity. It was the air we breathed. My mother made sure of that. She sang hymns while she cooked. She prayed over everything. She built our family around the belief that God was present in ordinary moments. I love that. I still do. I have worn a small silver cross around my neck since I was 12 years old. I put it on the morning after my mother gave it to me, and I never stopped. My father was different. Robert Mitchell was a quiet man who showed up at church every Sunday and almost nowhere else. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't dramatic. He was just absent. Not physically. He sat at the dinner table. He watched television in the living room. He drove us to school when my mother couldn't. But inside, somewhere that mattered, the lights were off. He was a man who didn't know how to reach anyone and who eventually stopped trying. When I was 15, my mother got sick. It happened fast at first and then slowly, the way serious illness does. The fast part was the diagnosis. The slow part was everything after. I watched her spend 2 years fighting, and I watched my father spend those same 2 years retreating. Not leaving, he never left, but becoming less present with each passing month, as if the weight of what was happening was too much for him to carry, and he'd decided quietly to put it down. So I picked it up. I learned to cook. I learned to manage medications and doctor appointments. I learned how to hold my mother's hand when she cried, and how to smile when she needed me to smile, and how to keep the house running when it felt like the whole world was coming apart. I was 15, then 16, then 17. I became very good at being the adult in the room. My mother died the summer I turned 17. I grieved. I prayed. And at some point during that season, I made a quiet decision about my father. So quiet I barely noticed making it. I stopped expecting anything from him. Not dramatically. I didn't confront him. I didn't blame him out loud. I just closed a door somewhere inside myself, gently and deliberately, and told myself that I had forgiven him for what he hadn't been able to give. I believed that for 20 years. There is a small framed photograph of Robert on a shelf in my apartment. I pass it every day. I rarely look at it directly. When people ask about my father, I say, "We're fine." It's not a lie. We have pleasant, short phone calls a few times a year. We talk about the weather. We talk about nothing. I thought that was fine. By the time I was 36, I had built a life I was genuinely proud of. I loved my students. I had close friends at church. I led a small group on Tuesday evenings. I read scripture consistently, served wherever I was asked, and prayed every morning without fail. And then, almost without my noticing exactly when it began, prayer stopped reaching anywhere. It wasn't a crisis moment. There was no dramatic breaking point. God simply began to feel absent. Not gone. I never stopped believing he existed. just unreachable. Like a signal that used to come through clearly and now produced only static no matter what I tried. I prayed harder. I fasted. I went on a 3-day retreat. I read books about spiritual dryness and tried everything they recommended. Nothing changed. I started to wonder what I had done. What hidden sin was closing the gap between me and God? I confessed everything I could think of. I asked for forgiveness repeatedly for things I'd already been forgiven for. I became exhausted. I became mechanical. I sat in church on Sunday mornings, surrounded by people who seemed genuinely moved, hands raised, tears on their faces, and I felt like I was watching it through glass. That was my life for 2 years. Faithful, sincere, and spiritually numb. Every day the same gray weight, every prayer the same hollow feeling, every Sunday morning feeling entirely cut off from the joy around me. I didn't tell anyone how bad it had gotten. On an ordinary Wednesday night in March, I went to bed earlier than usual. I was tired in the way that isn't really about sleep. My apartment was quiet. I turned off the lamp and closed my eyes and thought about nothing in particular. I never woke up in my own bed. What happened next, the doctors explained to me later. Sudden cardiac arrhythmia. Cause unknown. No prior warning signs. My neighbor heard the fall. He called 911. The paramedics found me unresponsive. I flatlined in the ambulance, twice. But what I experienced had nothing to do with what the paramedics saw. From my side of it, there was no emergency. There was no ambulance. One moment I was in my apartment, the quiet of a Wednesday night around me, and the next moment there was nothing. Not darkness, not silence. Just a clean, complete absence of everything physical, as if someone had gently removed the entire material world. And then the weight was gone. I didn't know how much weight I'd been carrying until it wasn't there anymore. Not just the tiredness of the last 2 years. Something older and heavier and deeper than that. It lifted in an instant, and I felt it leave, and I understood without anyone telling me that I had crossed into somewhere else. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me, because I have always been someone who is afraid of flying, afraid of darkness, afraid of the particular silence that follows bad news. But there was no fear here. There was only a sense of expanding, like every boundary I'd ever lived within was dissolving. And somewhere in that expansion, presence, a light that was not the kind of light that comes from a source. It was total. Not blinding, not the way the sun is blinding. It was more like being inside warmth, like warmth that also sees. I don't have better language for it than that, and I've tried for months to find it. I knew I was not alone, and I knew, in the same instant, exactly who I was not alone with. Not because I heard a name, not because I saw a face, but because the knowing was complete. The way you recognize the sound of your own name spoken by someone who loves you before your mind has even processed the syllables. I knew. The presence that has a name that every Christian I have ever known has spoken. I was in front of him, and he had been here the entire time. That's what I understood first. Not an accusation, an answer. The absence I had spent 2 years aching over wasn't his absence. He had been present through every hollow prayer, every dry Sunday morning, every quiet morning where my words seemed to vanish into thin air. He had heard every single word. I had not moved away from him, but something in me had been blocking the passage. There is no performance possible in that presence, no spiritual composure, no collected, capable version of yourself that you can present. Everything you are is simply there, visible, completely, in the most total way you can imagine. And the thing that stops you from being destroyed by that visibility is that the seeing and the loving are completely inseparable. He sees everything, and the love does not diminish. I felt that. And then he showed me something I did not expect, not my failures, not a list of sins, not anything I had been bracing for during those 2 years of asking myself what I had done wrong. A door. It was inside my own soul, a door that would not open, not because it had been locked from the outside, because I was the one holding it shut from the inside. I could feel it, a heaviness behind it, a held breath, something that had been in that sealed room for a very long time. And then Jesus brought me close to it, and he showed me what the door was connected to. My prayer, every prayer I had ever prayed, it had to pass through my heart to reach him. That is how he made me. The heart is the passage. But this door had been blocking that passage for years. Every prayer hitting it, every attempt at connection pressing against it and going nowhere. I wanted to know what was behind it, and he showed me. The face behind the door was not what I was expecting. It was not a wound I had acknowledged, not a betrayal I had named, not anything I had ever placed in the category of unforgiveness. It was Robert, my father, not a monster. He showed me that clearly, and I'm grateful for it. Just a man, a tired, emotionally limited man who had been given a family at a moment in his life when he didn't know what to do with one, and who had chosen the only response he understood: withdrawal. He hadn't meant to leave me to carry it. I believe that now. He simply did not have the capacity that moment required, and he never recovered from his shame about it. And so the silence between us calcified over decades into something we both called normal. But Jesus showed me what I had done with what Robert hadn't given me. He showed me the decision I had made at 16, 17, the quiet, careful decision to close the room, to protect myself from needing anything from Robert again, to never expect, never hope, never reach. I had built a wall so gently, so reasonably, that it felt like architecture and not defense. And I had called it forgiveness because I had stopped blaming him, because I could speak his name without bitterness, because I sent him a card on his birthday every year. But Jesus showed me that forgiveness is not the absence of anger, not composure, not the measured, polite relationship I had constructed to protect myself from further pain. What I had done was not forgiveness. It was lockdown. I had locked the room where the wound lived, sealed it so thoroughly that I'd forgotten what was inside, and built my whole spiritual life in a house with a door I never opened. And prayer cannot pass through a locked heart. He showed me what had been flowing from that door, the heaviness, the static, the feeling of speaking into concrete. Every morning I had sat with my Bible. Something in me had been straining against a sealed wall. The access I thought I'd lost had never been taken. It had been blocked. By me. By something I had done at 16 to survive and had never undone. And then he showed me what opens when that door opens. I don't know how to describe it precisely. It wasn't a vision of anything external. It was more like a felt sense of what spiritual access actually feels like when it isn't moving through a wall. Like remembering a sound you'd stopped hearing so gradually you'd forgotten it existed. That quality of prayer that actually goes somewhere. That sense of presence in worship that I'd had as a younger woman and had spent 2 years mourning. He showed me that it wasn't gone. It was waiting. He showed me myself as I had been before the locking. Not younger, not different in any obvious way, just open. Someone whose prayers moved through her freely. Someone who felt God in ordinary moments, the way my mother had taught me to. Someone who had access to something I had sealed off. And I understood, in a way that rearranged something fundamental in my thinking, that forgiving Robert had nothing to do with Robert. It was not approval of what he had done. It was not an erasure of my mother's illness, my lost teenage years, the loneliness of becoming an adult before I should have. It was not a declaration that he had been a good father. It was not even something he needed to know about, or ask for, or deserve. It was the releasing of a weight I had been carrying for 20 years, a weight that was never crushing him. I sat with that. Jesus did not open the door. He waited. He let me stay with it. The full reality of what Robert's absence had cost me. The years I managed alone. My mother's hand in mine while my father sat in another room. The birthday cards I learned to buy for myself. The growing up that happened quietly while no one was watching. He let me feel all of it. He did not rush me past it. He did not minimize it. He saw it with me, completely, and the love did not flinch. And then he asked me, not in words, but in the way everything in that place communicated, which was direct and complete and impossible to pretend you hadn't understood, whether I was willing to let it go. He wasn't invalidating the pain, nor was he saying my father had earned this grace. He asked simply because I was ready to stop being the one who carried it. I stayed with that question for what felt like a long time. And then I said yes, not with confidence, not with a burst of feeling, just quietly, from the deepest part of myself that could still choose yes. The door opened. What came through it, I am not going to try to describe because I don't have language for it. I will only tell you that it was the opposite of the weight, and that it was the beginning of something I had stopped believing I would feel again. Then I felt the pull. The presence remained with me. That's the thing I want you to hold on to. The detail that undid me when I had time to think about it. He did not disappear when I started going back. He came with me. All the way back to the machines, the lights, a nurse's voice saying my name, the ceiling of the ICU. I was alive. The first thing I did, alone in that hospital room before anyone else arrived, was pray. And this time, it went somewhere. I cannot fully explain the difference. The prayer wasn't louder or longer or more sophisticated than any I had prayed in the previous 2 years. But it moved, like water through a passage that had been cleared, like something that had been waiting behind a wall finally finding its way through. The gray was gone. Recovery took 6 weeks, physically. The other part has taken longer, and I think will keep going for the rest of my life, because I understand now that what Jesus showed me was not a one-time clearing, but a direction. Forgiveness is not an event. It's a choice you make and keep making as the layers of something that old reveal themselves one by one. But the direction changed in that hospital room. About 4 weeks after I came home, I picked up my phone and called Robert. I didn't do it to confront him or to demand an apology that was probably 20 years overdue. I didn't even try to explain what Jesus had shown me about that locked room. I just wanted to call. The conversation was ordinary. He asked how I was feeling. I told him I was better. He said he'd been worried. I said I knew. We talked about nothing for a few minutes, and then we said goodbye. But I was different while having it. Something that used to pull tight when I heard his voice was gone. Not because the history had changed, not because he had earned anything new, but because I had set down something I'd been carrying for 22 years, and without that weight, I could just talk to him. Just be in the conversation without bracing against it. The framed photograph is still on the shelf in my apartment. I look at it now, and the cross my mother gave me, I still wear it every day. But it doesn't feel like a habit anymore. And I need to ask you something directly, the same question I've been asking myself since I came back. Is there a door in your soul? Not a dramatic one. Not a door marked with the name of someone you know you haven't forgiven. I'm asking about the quiet ones. The doors you locked so carefully, so long ago that you've forgotten the face behind them. The doors you built for good reason, to protect yourself from someone who failed you at a moment when you needed them most, and that you then called healed. Because what Jesus showed me is that the blockage he reveals is almost never what we expect it to be. It's rarely the thing we've been asking forgiveness for. It's rarely the obvious wound. It's the old, careful one. The one we sealed and called moving on. The one that looks, from the outside, like composure. Unforgiveness that doesn't know it's unforgiveness. That's what was blocking me. It wasn't some dramatic hatred or burning bitterness, just a room I had locked when I was 16 to survive what was happening and never gone back to open. And that locked room was sitting in the passage between my prayers and God. If you have been feeling spiritually numb, if prayer has started to feel like your words are just bouncing off a wall, If worship leaves you standing at the edge of something you can't quite reach, if you're doing everything right and still feeling nothing, I'm not telling you that your answer is exactly mine. But I am telling you, it might not be the sin you've been confessing over and over. It might be something older, something you sealed so carefully you called it forgiveness. Here is the invitation I came back with. Ask Jesus to show you the door, not to force it open. You hold that choice, the same way I did. But ask him to show you what is there, to bring you close enough to see the face behind it. Because he will not accuse you. He will not shame you for locking it in the first place. He understands exactly what it cost you to survive what you survived. He sits in that pain with you, completely, and his compassion never wavers. He showed me a locked room I didn't know I had. He can show you yours. If something in this testimony reached you today, if you felt a flicker of recognition when I talked about the locked door, or the quiet decision that got called forgiveness, leave it in the comments. You don't have to have the words yet. Just let someone know you heard it, and stay close to this channel, because there are more of these stories. More people who came back from the edge carrying something they needed to share. We are not meant to carry these things alone. The door can open. Let him show you.